Now, we're going to be joined by phone call from Lagos. One of our staples gives us insights and talks more on certain issues that occur in the economy. And that is Dr. Adegboyega Adebajo. Of course, is an economist and lead advisor for Amethyst and Ashler Advisory. Good morning, Mr. Adebajo.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Chair Maka. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay. Now, let's do a brief overview of what we're talking about. The MTEF, FSP. Yesterday we had that conversation and we had Professor Mokhtar joining us from ABU Zaria, who shared his insights with us on the conversation. I'm going to talk about something. I'm going to point out something that he said rather in the course of the program, asking for your insights on that. But let's look at that. Now, in case you or just you're not aware of what happened on Wednesday at the FEC meeting that took place, the FSP MTEF has been approved by the FEC, now taken to now go to the process of making a budget that will now bring us to the budget for the 2026 budget for the country. What is the MTEF? The MTEF is the medium-term expenditure framework, and the FSP is the fiscal strategy paper. These are the things being used to help us make a budget, and then, of course, help us have plans for the year. Now, this is actually for 2026 to 2028. According to that, the total revenue projected is 34.33 trillion naira for 2026, as inclusive of earnings from government-owned enterprises. Now, the assumptions for this was that there will be a benchmark of 1.8 million barrels per day. That is actually about 2 point something barrels down from what was happening last year, where we had 2.06 as the benchmark. Now, the price will be at $64.85 per barrel, down from about 70 we had in 2025. However, the exchange rate came up to 1,512, up from about 1,004 we had pegged for last year, 2025. Now, Mr. Adebajo, I'm sure you've come across the story. What do you make of this permutations by the government?
Well, I think they're quite reasonable. First of all, let me say that it's rather pleasing that we have long-term plans as a country. Most times the policies and announcements that tend to come along by government in the course of the year are sort of responses to actual events going on in the economy. But when you have a long-term objective, especially going beyond the year, it enables the government to plan steadily towards achieving certain economic indices. This is also important because most of the loans, liabilities the government has undertaken are not one-year loans. They go over a certain period of time, between 3 to 5 years, maybe even longer. And of course, those loans have covenants that expect you to keep your economic indices within a certain range. So long-term planning is always a good thing. Now, in terms of these targets, oil at 54 amongst the targets or indices to be attained, this sounds reasonable and quite pretty much realistic. Remember, it's a benchmark in terms of the oil price, and given what goes on globally, because there's so little Nigeria as a country can actually do to influence the price of oil, because of the impact of OPEC and the impact of distortions in crisis areas in the world. I mean, a lot of us economists actually felt that the $75 benchmark for the 2025 budget was rather very high. And we've seen where oil has hovered around. There are indications that peace will be brokered in Ukraine. And at least we know that now we have a Trump administration that's still going to be there for at least a couple more years. So this will mean that 54 isn't so bad a price. And it's an average, really. If the price exceeds that, then it's well and good. But in addition to that is a production level. One thing the government has been doing is to ensure that the leakages in the crude oil area and the distortions we've had in our production have been removed as much as possible. And we've actually seen increased production. I feel it's not unlikely that the government actually pushes to exceed the 1.8 million barrels a day. I'm already aware that there are plans to speak to OPEC to increase the ceiling for Nigeria, but that, of course, will depend on what happens when sanctions are lifted from other countries like Venezuela. We don't know what the outcome will be, but there's production there, and that in itself could get into the world market. So generally, that's my view on that, both the FSP and the MTEF.
Okay, so now you've said quite a lot of things, and you say it's a reasonable adjustment from the last one. However, the question I have, good thing, yes, being more realistic than hopeful and optimistic. But what does that tell us about the government's mind is, economically?
Well, the government does have to be realistic as much as possible, and I feel budgeting conservatively is always a good thing. I see a situation, though, where perhaps the expected revenue, and that's in terms of the fiscal policy, trying to raise all that money from government agencies may have to be revised. And the reason I say that is simple. Remember the instance of the 15% capital gains tax and the impact it had on the stock exchange. There was the sales tax on petrol at the pump, which has had to be postponed. There was the sales tax on tickets at the airports too, which is not really there right now because of protests. At the end of the day, the government is going to have to manage its fiscal objectives and the impact it has on the wider populace. With a new tax regime coming in January 2026 and a widening of the tax net, there's no doubt that what's expected is increased revenue. But how this will play out between the taxation impact, the incidence of tax on the population, the tax-paying population, and government agencies themselves, and the cost of collecting the tax, which is a very important element that the World Bank and IMF looks at. Yeah, all those things will come out to play. The revenue may be somewhat, in my view, very enthusiastic, overly stated, but then reality will set in, and it's a plan. So it just remains to be seen how it works out.
All right. Now we've seen these projections, and you say it's actually a realistic one. We all keep saying that, but there's a question. It's about the budget. Now, the MTEF, as my guest yesterday said, most times the budget doesn't follow the MTEF. The budget is being done without actually following these indices. However, we was seeming to be vying off our January to December budget cycle. Will that have any impact come 2026?
Well, there's certainly no doubt about it that there will be an impact. But budgets themselves are based on what happened the preceding year and how the economy is being read in terms of the coming year. But whilst it may look like it has no bearing to the MTEF, the MTEF itself becomes a boundary, a border, so to say, beyond which certain targets may either not exceed or may either not go below as a benchmark. So that would always guide both budget development and budget implementation. As you well know, as a country, we've never actually had a budget performance that has gone maybe been beyond 75%. It's always been relatively low. And some of these plans are carried over. So the impact of some of the things you will find in the budget in particular may actually not be felt that year. And it may actually take beyond 12 months to feel it. So it's not unusual to find something that seems like a dissonance between the budget and the MTEF. But oversight, one keeps the MTEF targets and indices in view. That's the way it tends to play out, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to stay with the comment you just made now. At times you don't see the benefits or the dividends of a budget until maybe well after that cycle. Would it be ideal to now, instead of doing a yearly budget, maybe biannually budget or something, so that we say, okay, this budget is supposed to run from 2026 to 2028, and that's whatever we agree on, that's what we're doing? Would that be more wise?
Okay, that sounds pretty interesting, but here's the thing. One, the NTF becomes a strategy document, and it guides those particular MDAs that are expected to implement it, but it doesn't have the weight of going through the National Assembly and becoming a legal document, so to say, a legislation, which is pretty much unlike the budget. Budgets become the appropriation bill for the coming year. That means the government has the backing of the law to spend the money in the budget and to collect the money indicated as revenue in the budget. This is normal governance practice, and it's standard with public sector accounting. But like I said earlier, even as an individual, if you plan on a day-to-day basis, you may find that you lose sight of the better planning for a week, or maybe for a month, or maybe for the entire year. Okay. Now, what happens in the course of the year is the government tends to prioritize what aspects of the budget they will implement as the year goes by. And this seems to appear that the government changes mid-track. But of course, there will be certain things that are outside the budget that tends to suggest that the government is responding to the environment.
We have less than 30 seconds. Just tell me, what are your expectations of the 2026 budget?
Well, there's very little that has happened in 2025. And when I say there's very little that has happened in 2025, I have sought to pinpoint certain activities with the 2025 budget, and there's a big gap in that it's missing. And so I would expect that we will be a lot tidier in terms of the plans and what we would achieve in 2026. I know the government tends to get feedback. A lot of the feedback is that the positive impacts on the economy are yet to hit the man on the streets. And hopefully, as we get into 2026, being practically an election year, we expect to see a greater impact on individuals. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Adegboyega Adebajo, for your insights on the conversation.
Right. Thank you.
And that's it for Business Daily this morning on Trust TV. For more of our news programs and documentaries, do well to follow us on the social media platforms and on our YouTube live stream. The news comes up in a few minutes. I've been your host this morning, Chiamaka Nwafo. Same time, same place next week. Bye for now.